Hey guys, Palpatine here. I am back for my 9.0 Pre-Patch Restoration Shaman guide this time. We're going to go over all the talents, class changes, essences, anything you might need to help you succeed as a Resto Shaman in patch 9.0. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. So, the class changes presented to Resto were sort of the same as Ellie. Obviously, you know, we have our Shaman-specific spells now rather than just being Resto, Ellie, or Enhancement. A lot of familiar faces here, you know, Chain Lightning, Chain Heal, Flame Shock, nothing new. We do have access to Flame Tongue Weapon now. This isn't really a practical ability, as you won't really be in melee too often as a Resto Shaman, but it's nice to have. Same thing with Primal Strike, you know. And then we also have Lightning Shield as well, which is pretty cool, you know, get a little bit of extra damage on targets that melee you. And that's about it for the Shaman-specific spells. For Resto, however, we do have a couple changes here. Earth Shield is now baseline. This is pretty nice. It's going to help our capabilities of healing tanks in 5-man groups, and also just being able to output a little bit of extra healing on a target. It's a pretty solid change. We also have Mana Tide Totem back again, which obviously you drop it, you know, get a little bit of extra mana regeneration for all party and raid members. 3-minute cooldown. It's pretty solid. Nice in raid. Won't have too many uses in Mythic Plus outside of, you know, getting mana back for yourself as you're the only healer in the group, but still cool. And we also have Water Shield now as well. And Water Shield basically works, you know, it's another elemental shield, so you can only have one of these on yourself at any time. It gives you mana every 5 seconds, and if a melee hits you, you also get 2% of your maximum mana. This is pretty cool, just going to give you a little bit of extra mana back during fights, and also it's only specific for having the shield on yourself, so you can apply Water Shield to yourself and still apply Earth Shield to a tank or a different target of your party, and, you know, get both uses out of it that way. So Water Shield has a 1-hour buff. You kind of just set it and forget it, and that's about it. So, and that's pretty much it for the Resto baseline class changes. So now we're going to move on into talents. Now, for talents, there's a couple of different options you could play depending on the scenarios you're in. I'm going to go one by one each row, kind of explain the benefits of each talent, and then we'll move on from there. So on the 15 tier, we have Torrent, Undulation, and Unleash Life. Now, Torrent did receive a slight healing nerf, but it's only because the baseline spell of Riptide was buffed slightly in the spell modifier for the instant cast. So you'll no longer get an additional 30% heal, but it's just 20%. Nothing really changed with the functionality. Undulation functions the same. Every 3rd healing wave or healing surge gives you an extra 50% heal. This is a solid option in dungeons. If you feel like you're going to need a lot of single target healing, you can go Undulation and it'll help you out a lot there. Unleash Life functions the same way as it did. You just use it, and then your next direct spell, healing spell will hit for 35% more. This is the most versatile of the 3, I believe, and honestly, even in Mythic Plus, this isn't really a bad option. This is definitely going to be your go-to option in Raid, however. Only being a 15-second cooldown, it's a decent-sized heal, and it costs very, very little mana. It's extremely strong, and my tips for using Unleash Life is to keep it on cooldown pretty much as often as you can. Even if you don't have a lot to heal, having an Unleash go out is just solid, so that's kind of how that talent row is going. For the 25 tier, we have Echo of the Elements, Deluge, and Surge of Earth. Surge of Earth is a new talent here. Consumes up to 3 charges of Earth Shield to heal up to 3 allies near your Earth Shield target by an amount per charge consumed. Currently, this talent just doesn't really do enough healing to be warranted as a choice in your talents. It's just a little bit undertuned at the moment. Deluge obviously works the same way. When your healing rain is down, your healing wave, healing surge, and chain heal for an additional 20%. This is a solid choice if you're playing a fight where it requires you to be stacked up, so you don't have a lot of movement, because you'll obviously have more allies inside your chain or your healing rain. But most of the time, at least personally for me, Echo of the Elements is going to be your go-to option here in both Raiding and Mythic Plus. Having the extra charge of Riptide, Lava Burst for some extra damage, and normally Healing Stream Totem is really solid to have an extra usage of those. So on the 30 tier here, this is all going to be utility based. Nothing's going to increase your healing throughput, but we have Spirit Wolf, Earth Grab Totem, and Static Charge. Static Charge is nice in 5-man dungeons if you want to get a couple usages of Capacitor Totem. pretty much all there is to say about it. Earth Grab Totem, if you need roots, this is nice to have. And you also can have 50% slow to targets who have already been rooted by this, so it could have some nice usages. And Spirit Wolf, for me, is just my personal pick. Having the extra mobility from Ghost Wolf in conjunction with the damage reduction is very strong. And it's passive. You don't really have to worry about it. It just gives you a little bit of extra movement speed to get out of danger's way, or maybe a damage reduction, like mini cooldown if you need it. So that's kind of going to be the 30 row. On the 35 row, we have Ancestral Vigor, Earthen Wall Totem, and Ancestral Protection Totem. Now, APT has had some usages in the past on some fights where it could help you cheese certain mechanics, like on Mythic Jaina. Obviously, the dot from the boss would stack up really high, and it would be almost impossible to heal through, so APT can be used to kind of cushion the raid and bring everyone, give somebody a free res. It's nice, but most of the time you won't be taking this talent, as unless you can certainly rely on it saving somebody, you're not going to get a lot of value out of it. It has a 5-minute cooldown, so for most fights you only get 1, maybe 2 usages of this talent, so I wouldn't recommend it in any scenario. Earthen Wall Totem is a 1-minute cooldown. You drop it at a targeted location, and when it is down, it absorbs the damage of targets that would be hit inside of the radius of Earth Wall Totem. This is a pretty nice talent. It's very versatile. It doesn't cost a lot of mana. It does a decent amount of healing absorption as well, so it's a pretty solid choice. However, if you want to play like a more passive build, you don't want to worry about too many spells, you can always take Ancestral Vigor in this spot too. This just gives you a 10% increased stamina buff to anyone hit with Healing Wave, Healing Surge, Chain Heal, or Riptide. This is pretty solid. And if you don't want to have to worry about the active ability of Earthen Wall Totem, Ancestral Vigor isn't going to be too much worse. So, on the 40 tier, we have Nature's Guardian, Graceful Spirit, and Windrush Totem. Now, WRT is extremely strong in raiding scenarios. Most of the time, if you have a Shaman in your group, they're going to want to be taking this talent, at least one of them. And just the 60% movement speed you gain for all party members is very, very strong. And quite often, it's almost mandatory for some fights for heavy movement. Graceful Spirit is going to reduce the cooldown of your Spirit Walker's Grace, and also give you a bit of extra movement speed. This is kind of my go-to pick in Mythic Plus, as a lot of times in packs you're kind of forced to move, and one of the biggest weaknesses of Resto is in order to do a lot of your big healing, you have to stand still while you're doing it. So Graceful Spirit's nice to just have some extra usages of Spirit Walker's Grace throughout the duration of a key. Nature's Guardian is also not a bad choice. This is just a cushion in case you get hit really hard. It heals you for 20% of your health anytime you drop below 35%. It's got an internal CD of 45 seconds, but it's still solid. If you feel like you need that extra survivability, you can always go with Nature's Guardian here. On the 45 row, we have Flash Flood, Downpour, and Cloudburst Totem. Now, Flash Flood is pretty useful in Mythic Plus, having the extra cast time reduction of your heals whenever you consume a Tidal Wave stack is pretty nice. This can definitely help pump out some healing surges. This in combination with Undulation is very popular in Mythic Plus. Just getting some extra, super fast healing surges or whatever is pretty nice. We also have Downpour in this row. Downpour isn't really that strong. It doesn't cost a ton of mana, and it only has a 5-second cooldown. Every time you hit a target, it's increased by 5 seconds, and I believe it goes up to 5 targets, or up to 6, sorry. So this could be a 30-second cooldown if you get maximum usage out of it. And then we have Cloudburst Totem. Now, Cloudburst for me is what makes Restoration so strong and so good against extremely high damage. It works almost like it's kind of like a pre-active spell that you want to use before reactive healing. It's kind of hard to explain. Cloudburst is a little bit of a healing curve or learning curve to it. So this replaces your healing stream, and basically anytime you drop a Cloudburst Totem, all of the healing that you do within the 15 seconds the Cloudburst is active goes into the totem, and a portion of it is expelled whenever the Cloudburst duration expires. You can also activate this ability at any time before the channel is over to, send out the Cloudburst healing anytime you want. And if you take Echo of the Elements, you actually get 2 charges of Cloudburst Totem. So, pretty solid. On the 50 row here, we have High Tide, Wellspring, and Ascendance. Now, Ascendance is a really cool spell. I wish it would just be a baseline Shaman cooldown, honestly. I don't really think it's too powerful to the point to where it should be warranted as a talent choice. However, it's just the way it is. Sentence just basically gives you some extra duplicating on your healing spells to other nearby party members, so you can cast a healing surge on one target and it'll kind of hit everything. It's a nice emergency heal, so if you feel like you're really low or the group's really low, you can just press Ascendance and it'll kind of give you a big burst of healing. Not really useful in raid in any scenario, and sometimes in Mythic Plus you could play this talent, but it's just kind of up to your discretion. If you feel like you need Ascendance, you can go for it. Wellspring is a surge of water that flies forward from you. It hits any allies in a wide arc, has a 20-second cooldown, only costs 400 mana. This spell actually has been buffed slightly, so with a slight buff to Wellspring and the slight nerf to High Tide, we could see Wellspring emerge as a possible talent choice in raiding. And I'll have to kind of keep an eye out on what people are playing, but it seems like it has been a choice occasionally, but also we have High Tide on this row, and High Tide is also very strong. So every 4,000 mana you spend, your next 2 chain heals will heal for an additional 10%, and it doesn't reduce with each jump. So High Tide is extremely strong. A lot of times if you can bank on having a Cloudburst totem available for big damage moments, you can unleash life into a High Tide chain heal and do a bunch of AoE healing, and it's very, very strong in that scenario. So this is kind of the recommended talent setup I would play in most scenarios. Sometimes you can play Undulation, Flash Flood, maybe even Ascendance if you feel like you need it. But for me, this is kind of going to be my go-to pick for most content. And obviously, if you need, you can take Windrush Totem as well. So let's move on to Azerite gearing now. Now, Azerite gearing is pretty simple for restoration. The main thing that you're going to want to be aiming for here is Heart of Darkness. With Heart of Darkness no longer requiring corruption, it's just active all the time. This is going to be your best go-to Azerite trait in pretty much every scenario. Just having the extra secondary stats is really nice. And ideally, you'd like to get 3 of these if you could. And that's about that. Turn of the Tide is pretty decent for Mythic Plus. Having the additional 5% buff to Tidal Wave bonuses and giving a little bit of extra healing is really nice. And then for like big raid encounters and AoE healing, you're going to want to have a combination of Overflowing Shores and Spouting Spirits. Spouting Spirits is really strong for your Spirit Link totem, obviously, and Overflowing Shores is good for your healing rain. Stacking these does give you a small benefit. It's nice to get a little bit of extra healing oomph from them, but the main reason why you want one of both of these traits is the increased radiance of both healing rain and Spirit Link totem. So just having the extra radius on those spells is very, very strong, and that's why I recommend you take at least one of those. So yeah, that's about it for that. Moving on to stat priority and gearing. The stat priority for Resto is fairly similar to what it has been. Crit is always going to be very strong for extra value from your Resurgence passive, which gives you mana anytime you crit an ability with your healing spells. And Mastery is obviously really good in progression content, being able to kind of snipe the low health targets and get extra healing value on those is extremely strong. Most of the times, as a Resto Shaman in raid, you're going to want to look to heal targets that are lower on health because you'll gain increased value from your Mastery in that sense. Haste isn't a terrible stat. It's not really that necessary, as most of your spells for Resto are casted anyway, so it's not like having additional haste is going to help you there. And versatility is solid for damage reduction and survivability purposes. Gives you a little bit of extra oomph in your healing, but it's not going to affect it like too much. So in my opinion, I would say crit and mastery are the 2 most important, and then haste verse are kind of sort of there towards the end. And then leech is also a nice tertiary stat to have as a healer. Basically any healer, leech is nice to have. It just gives you that little bit of extra healing done on yourself, and it's very strong. So moving on to essences. Now there's kind of 2 different sort of build setups you can play here. One's going to be for Mythic Plus, one's going to be for rating. So excuse me on that. For rating scenarios, Vision of Perfection is going to be your best go-to major here. Having the extra procs of Healing Tide Totem is extremely strong, and Most of the time, as long as it procs during a moment where the raid is even damaged at all, you're going to get a lot of value out of Vision Major. Also, just having the increased reduction on Healing Tide Totem is very good as well. For miners, there's a couple of different options you can play here. I think Ever-Rising Tide most of the time is going to give you a really good bang for your buck. Getting the increased intellect or mana, both of which are really good for restoration. It's very strong. I'd recommend if you need help with mana and you find yourself going a lot, you can play Memory of Lucid Dreams Miner here. This is going to give you a ton of mana refund as well. And then for your last spot, Unwavering Ward is going to be really strong in raiding scenarios. Just the extra shield that you put on targets, and they all take 3% reduced damage is very strong as well. There's a couple of other things you can switch around here. If you feel like you don't need the mana, you can always play Formless Void or even Conflict and Strife in this slot. Just kind of depends on how you feel with the fight and if you're going to need the extra mana or not. Now, for Mythic Plus, your go-to damaging Major Essence is going to be Crucible of Flame. This thing does a lot of damage. It's really good. It's versatile. You can use it for healing as well. If you feel like you don't need the damage and more of what you need is kind of single target focused healing, then I would recommend going with Vitality Conduit instead in your major slot. As for miners in Mythic Plus, it's kind of the same. The only thing I would recommend is instead of playing Unwavering War, to play Spirit of Preservation here. Just having the extra healing on your Healing Surge is really nice. And then for your other miners, I think ERT is still solid. You can play Memory if you need to. Mana's not as much of an issue in Mythic Plus, as you can stop between pulls to drink if it's necessary. But that's kind of how the healing thing, in my opinion, would work best. So moving on to Trinkets. Now, for Restoration, the Trinkets don't really matter like for your healing a ton. There's not really a lot of throughput dedicated healing Trinkets. So I've been playing with the Forbidden Obsidian Claw. This does a decent amount of single target damage, and it also restores mana to yourself, which is really strong as well. And then for the other option that I've been playing personally is the Manifesto of Madness. Just getting some extra crit, some extra verse. It's kind of like a mini cooldown. You can use it for healing capability, or if you're just hitting a boss, you can use this as a damage cooldown as well. There's a couple other things you can play here. The Humming Black Dragon scale isn't too bad. You can also play like a music box if you have the Signet to go along with it. But most of the time, your trinkets aren't going to really have that much of an impact on your throughput. So moving on to kind of the rotation of a Resto Shaman. Obviously, you're not going to really have a defined healing rotation, as all scenarios are different and all healing can be subject to change. So, regardless of how much you train your muscle memory, the more adaptable you are to different scenarios, the better you're going to be as a healer. So my biggest recommendation, obviously, is just having Water Shield on yourself at all times. Trying to keep Earth Shield active on either your main tank or a target taking very heavy damage. You're going to use if you need light single target healing, you're going to use Healing Wave. If you're going to need big single target healing, you can use Healing Surge. The biggest tips for restoration is you want to keep Unleash Life, Healing Rain, and Cloudburst on cooldown as much as you possibly can. At least one charge of Cloudburst. Just because this thing has a 15-second cooldown, most of the time, just saving one for a moment where you definitely need it and then using it on cooldown outside of that, you're going to net more healing from this talent. Unleash Life has a very short cooldown. And as for augmenting spells, if the group is taking very heavy damage, I would use Unleash Life exclusively on Chain Heal. And if the group is not taking a lot of damage, you can use your Unleash Life instead on a Riptide, on like your main tank or something like that. Other than that, really, just kind of coordinating with your other healers on when to use healing cooldowns. Mana Tide Totem has a 3-minute cooldown, so potentially you could get 2 uses of this if you use one towards the beginning. Just make sure that you use Mana Tide at a moment where it's going to give healers the most amount of value, and it won't allow them to cap on mana too easily, because obviously, staying at 100% mana means you're not doing any effective healing, and that's never a good thing. So your raid leader might assign different cooldowns for different purposes. Spirit Link will probably be assigned to you at some point. Same with Mana Tide Totem, or Healing Tide Totem, excuse me. And other than that, like I said, just keeping Riptide rolling as much as you can. having Unleash Life on cooldown, using it on Chain Heal and Big AoE or Riptide and single target, and making sure that you try to keep Healing Rain down as often as possible. The optimal place to place Healing Rain, if the target is stationary, it's usually best to just throw it on the group of melee, because this thing has a target cap of 6 anyway, and most of the time the melee are always going to be in melee, right? So you're always going to get healing value out of having Healing Rain on the melee. If the fight has heavy movement, however, and you find yourself in a situation where your ranged players are stacked, pretty evenly moving together as a group, then you can opt to use Healing Rain on your ranged group party instead. As long as you're getting big value out of your Healing Rain, it's going to be solid. Also, we have our Earthen Wall Totem, kind of same thing. Either place it on the melee or place it on a group of people is going to be taking damage. And that's about it in that sense. When you're not doing any effective healing, all damage is good damage. So just applying Flame Shock to your target, filling with Lava Burst if you want, and just filling empty globals with Lightning Bolt. You don't want to cast Lava Burst too often because obviously it does have a mana cost, and you'd rather use your mana up on healing spells rather than damaging spells. But all damage contributed was going to help the boss die faster. So if you have a moment of downtime where you're not really healing that much, it's always good to be casting a damaging ability in that sense. So other healing tips that I can provide from a personal standpoint to other healers is, one, try not to do ineffective healing, also known as overhealing. I know this is hard to avoid, especially as a Resto Shaman, where a lot of your heals are, kind of, like your chain heal is quote-unquote smart heal. My biggest tip for this is trying not to heal targets with single target healing that are close to full health. Most of the other healers are going to do that job for you. Your biggest concern as a Resto Shaman anyway is big AoE healing. Your single target isn't really your strength, so don't worry too much about it. If you have downtime and you just want to save some mana, go ahead and just throw some healing waves out, but it's not your utmost importance. The biggest thing for Resto is AoE. Also, making sure you keep a good eye on your mana. Anytime you kill a boss and you have a bunch of mana left over, that could have been healing that you could have been doing. And unless your fight is heavily on farm and you don't really need to, then I would suggest, going through as much of your active mana pool as possible without also going just utilizing your mana and utilizing your cooldowns as well. If you're in like a pug raid or something and you don't have like a healing rotation for cooldowns or whatever, just use them when you can. Get the most amount of usage out of your cooldowns. If a fight's 10 minutes long, you could potentially have 3 Spirit Link totems as opposed to just dropping it once when you feel like you panicked. You're gonna miss out on some healing and some utility for your team there. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about Resto Shaman in the pre-patch. If I missed anything, feel free to leave a comment down below. Let me know what I can improve upon. But other than that, we're going to move on to some other specs next. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you in the future. Peace.